Rhea Maddox was a quiet, peculiar girl, a shadow in the small town of Danner's Hollow. Surrounded by whispers and curious stares, she moved like a ghost through the crowded streets. Her long, dark hair was often tangled, and her clothes worn. But it was the stillness of her demeanor that unsettled most. She didn't talk much, and when she did, it was often to herself. People in town called her strange, not right, though no one ever bothered to understand why. Her parents were kind, but they kept their distance. They never spoke much to her, as if they too were unsure how to connect with a daughter who felt like she was from another world. Her father worked long hours at the factory, his mind always on the job. Her mother, gentle but distant, rarely looked up from her knitting. Rhea's existence felt like a puzzle no one could solve. She spent most of her time alone, wandering the fields at the outskirts of town, gazing at the distant horizon where the woods met the sky. The town was steeped in its small town charm, but Rhea felt it was all a facade. The real world, one that spoke of strange, forbidden things, was just beyond the edge of town. In the woods she always felt drawn to. There was a disconnect between her and everything else, a rift that no one had the patience or curiosity to bridge. The tension in Danner's Hollow was palpable, like a storm that couldn't decide whether to break or pass. The townspeople tried their best to go about their daily lives, but the shadow of fear lingered in every conversation. No one spoke openly about the downed alien shuttle that had been discovered in the nearby forest months ago, but it hung over them like an unsaid truth. The authorities had sealed off the area, but their silence only deepened the town's unease. Everyone knew something had happened, but no one was willing to ask questions. Rhea, however, felt the weight of it. She could sense the unease in the air, the way her neighbors avoided eye contact, how conversations dropped into hushed whispers when the topic of the wreckage came up. People spoke of alien invasions, of threats they didn't understand. But Rhea, with her quiet eyes and introspective nature, saw through the layers of fear and confusion. The town was on the border of the human-alien buffer zone, a place where two worlds collided and the mistrust between them was thick enough to cut through. But Rhea also saw the other side, the strange, unexplained pull towards the forest that she could never fully explain. She didn't fear the unknown. She was curious. It was as if something within the woods, deep and ancient, had called to her. It was a magnetic force, one that no one else seemed to understand, but one that Rhea felt in her bones. The forest had always been more than just a place to Rhea. It was her sanctuary. When she wandered beneath the canopy of trees, the world outside felt distant, irrelevant. There was something within the woods, something deep within her that called out to it. It was more than just the isolation. It was as if the forest itself understood her. Every rustling leaf, every whisper of wind spoke to her in ways words never could. She often felt like an outsider, a stranger in her own life. But the woods, here, in the ancient silence of the trees, she didn't feel so alone. There was a quiet peace, an unspoken bond with the land. It was the only place where she could hear her own thoughts clearly, without the distractions of the world, the gossip, the judgments. And yet, as much as Rhea felt connected to the forest, there was always the underlying sense that there was something more to discover, something hidden just out of sight. She couldn't explain it. She didn't need to. The pull was stronger than any fear or doubt she had. The forest had secrets, and Rhea was determined to uncover them, no matter how strange or dangerous. One afternoon, as the light waned and the shadows stretched long across the forest floor, Rhea stumbled upon it. At first, she thought it was just another piece of debris from the wrecked shuttle, but as she drew closer, her heart began to race. What lay before her was not metal or machinery, but something organic, an alien creature lying in a heap, barely alive. The creature was humanoid in shape, though its skin was a dark, mottled green that shifted like liquid. Its eyes, large and wide, were filled with terror, its body trembling in pain. The sight was both alien and somehow familiar, and Rhea's heart ached with an instinct she couldn't explain.
She had no idea who or what this being was, but something within her knew it needed help. Despite the warning that have been drilled into her since childhood, the warnings about the alien threat, about the dangers of trusting anything outside of humanity, Rhea's instincts kicked in. She dropped to her knees beside the alien, her hands shaking as she carefully examined the creature. Blood, or something like it, oozed from a wound in its side, and it flinched at her touch. "You're hurt," Rhea whispered, though she knew the creature couldn't understand her. But somehow, she knew that it understood her actions. The empathy, the compassion, they spoke louder than any words ever could. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. The world outside had taught her to fear this alien, to see it as a threat. But Rhea, all she could see was a wounded creature in need of care, a being not so different from herself. Without a second thought, she made her choice. She would help.
The days that followed were a blur. Rhea took the alien deep into the forest, away from the town, away from prying eyes. She found a secluded spot, a hidden grove shielded by thick vines and towering trees. There, she built a small shelter, using the resources the forest offered, and began tending to the alien's wounds. It was a slow, painstaking process, and Rhea had no real knowledge of alien biology. But she had an instinct, an unshakable belief, that this creature deserved her help. She kept it hidden from the town, from her parents, from everyone. The decision was not without risk. If anyone found out what she had done, there would be no going back. The alien would be taken, studied, feared. Rhea would be labeled a traitor, an enemy of her own people. The weight of this knowledge sat heavily on her shoulders, but it didn't stop her. She felt an unspoken bond with the creature. It was vulnerable, terrified, and in pain, and Rhea would not abandon it. As the days passed, the alien began to heal. It became more alert, more aware of Rhea's presence. It would watch her with its dark eyes, its gaze intense and almost intelligent, as if it was trying to understand her just as much as she was trying to understand it. In these quiet moments, Rhea couldn't help but wonder what the alien had been through. What kind of world had it come from? Why had it crashed on Earth? The answers to these questions were as elusive as the creature's true nature, but Rhea was determined to learn them. She had made a choice, one that defied all the rules, and she would stand by it, no matter what. Rhea's bond with the alien was growing stronger. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, but it was a line that had to be crossed. She had chosen empathy over fear, compassion over isolation. And in doing so, she had discovered something profound, that humanity's greatest strength was not in its ability to destroy, but in its ability to care. But as Rhea sat beside the alien, watching it slowly regain strength, she knew that her actions would have consequences. The outside world would soon learn of her betrayal, and when it did, everything would change. The thick woods of Danner's Hollow were alive with whispers. Every rustling leaf and distant crack of a twig was a reminder of the secret Rhea had been keeping, of the alien she had found in the woods. Every time she ventured into the trees, the weight of the world seemed to lift from her shoulders, but it also pressed heavier on her heart. In the small rural town, at the edge of a post-contact world, any mention of the alien species was met with fear, suspicion, and anger. The government's silence about the wreckage on the outskirts only made the atmosphere heavier, as though the very earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Rhea was different from the rest. She had always felt like an outsider. Quiet, peculiar, and often lost in her thoughts, she never quite fit in with her peers. The whispers about her being not right came from people who couldn't see past her fears. But Rhea had always known there was something more, something beyond what people saw. And it was the forest, wild, untamed, and full of unknowns, that called to her. That's where she found him. Kale, the wounded alien barely clinging to life. And despite everything, Rhea couldn't turn her back on him.
Today, she was preparing a hidden sanctuary deep within the trees. A small cave nestled in the rocky hillside, concealed by thick branches and overgrown vines. She carried bags full of supplies, stolen from her parents' house, her heart racing with every creaking floorboard she snuck over. Rhea had already done this once, and every step deeper into the woods made her feel the gravity of her choice.
The cave was sparse, dirt floor, uneven walls, but it was hidden, and it was shelter. Kale would be safe here, even if the world around them wanted nothing more than to see him gone. Rhea took a moment, kneeling at the entrance, and peered into the darkness. Kale stirred on the makeshift cot she had fashioned from blankets and branches. His skin shimmered faintly in the low light, an eerie, otherworldly glow. His eyes flickered open, filled with confusion and distrust. Rhea's breath caught, but she didn't look away. "I'm here, Kale," she whispered, her voice steady despite her fear. "You're safe. For now." She set down the bag and knelt beside him, offering him the food she had brought. Her hands shook, but not from fear. She had never been more certain of anything in her life. Kale's eyes darted from Rhea's outstretched hand to the forest beyond the cave, where the shadows seemed to hold untold dangers. His body, sleek and reptilian, rippled with unease. Every muscle was tense, every movement cautious. Rhea could feel the weight of his mistrust pressing down on her. She wasn't human to him. She was just another unpredictable element in a world that had been nothing but threats. She tried to speak softly, to reassure him, but the words didn't matter. Not to Kale. His sharp, slit-pupiled eyes followed every shift in her movements, every breath she took. His hissing exhale was a warning, a challenge. It was clear. He didn't know if he could trust her, and she couldn't blame him. Rhea reached for her satchel and pulled out a small, carved wooden figure. Something simple, something from her childhood. "This is something of mine," she said, offering it to him. "It's not dangerous." Her voice was shaky but calm. She didn't expect him to understand her words, but maybe, just maybe, he could sense her intention. Kale's eyes flickered from Rhea's outstretched hand to the forest beyond the cave, where the shadows seemed to hold untold dangers. His body, sleek and reptilian, rippled with unease. Every muscle was tense, every movement cautious. Rhea could feel the weight of his mistrust pressing down on her. She wasn't human to him. She was just another unpredictable element in a world that had been nothing but threats. She tried to speak softly, to reassure him, but the words didn't matter. Not to Kale. His sharp, slit-pupiled eyes followed every shift in her movements, every breath she took. His hissing exhale was a warning, a challenge. It was clear. He didn't know if he could trust her, and she couldn't blame him. Rhea reached for her satchel and pulled out a small, carved wooden figure. Something simple, something from her childhood. "This is something of mine. It's, not dangerous." Her voice was shaky, but calm. She didn't expect him to understand her words, but maybe, just maybe, he could sense her intention. Kale's gaze flickered from the figure back to her, his distrust growing with every passing second. His lips parted, revealing sharp teeth as he let out a low, guttural growl. Rhea froze, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. She had never seen a creature like him before, and yet, something inside her knew he wasn't evil. The air between them thickened, the silence growing unbearable. But then, Kale did something unexpected. He reached for the figure, his movements slow, measured, still guarded, but not hostile. Rhea's heart leapt in her chest. It was a small victory, a fragile bridge built from nothing but shared silence. Days passed. They didn't speak, not in any way that made sense. Rhea didn't understand his language, and Kale didn't understand hers. But there were other ways to communicate. Rhea spent hours sketching pictures, maps of Earth, images of nature, of the animals she loved. She spent her nights talking softly to him, despite the awkwardness. She couldn't help it. She wanted him to know he wasn't alone. Kale seemed intrigued, though his wariness never fully disappeared.
Sometimes he would study the drawings for hours, his alien eyes tracing the strange shapes, the unfamiliar symbols. Once or twice, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition. Perhaps something in the images reminded him of his home, of a place far beyond the stars. Still, Kale's alien nature couldn't be ignored. He was so different from her in ways she couldn't understand yet. His long, segmented arms, the rigid reptilian spines running down his back, the subtle flicker of his forked tongue. Everything about him screamed alien, and yet, he wasn't just a monster. Rhea refused to believe that. One night, as Rhea sat beside him, her fingers gently brushing the edges of his scales, she spoke again. "You're not alone, Kale. I'm here, and I'm going to help you." Kale didn't respond, but Rhea could feel his gaze on her, softer now, less uncertain.
But outside the sanctuary, the world was changing. The sound of distant helicopters, the rumble of military vehicles in the town's outskirts, Rhea could feel the tension in her bones. The military had begun to patrol more frequently, circling the woods like vultures searching for a meal. The authorities had their eyes on the wreckage, and they knew the truth. They were coming. Rhea's heart raced as she sat in the cave, Kale resting beside her. Every day brought more fear, more uncertainty. She had to protect them, but at what cost? The pressure of keeping her secret was taking its toll, and the consequences were too dire to contemplate. The whispers of the town, how they feared an alien invasion, how they thought Kale was a threat, grew louder with each passing day. Rhea couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming, and when it came, she would have to make a choice. It happened sooner than she expected. A military drone buzzed near the cave, its sensors sweeping the forest with a mechanical hum. Rhea's heart jumped into her throat as she froze, staring at the tiny glowing red light from the drone. Kale tensed beside her, his eyes widening with alarm. She had no time to think, no time to plan. Without hesitation, Rhea darted to the control panel she had set up in the corner of the cave, an old device she had modified to disable the drone's tracking systems. Her hands shook as she worked, every second feeling like an eternity. The drone's buzzing grew louder, closer. Sweat trickled down Rhea's face. With a final click, she hit the shutdown button. The drone jerked, then fell silent, its lights flickering out. Rhea collapsed against the cave wall, breathing heavily. She had done it. For now, they were safe, but she knew it wouldn't last. The military wouldn't stop searching. She had bought them a few more hours, maybe a day. Kale's eyes, still wide with distrust, softened just a fraction. He might not understand the extent of the risk she had taken, but Rhea saw the flicker of something in his gaze, perhaps understanding or gratitude. But the danger was far from over. That night, as Rhea lay awake, the weight of her choices pressed down on her. The quiet of the woods was heavy with the sounds of distant patrols. She couldn't keep running forever. Eventually, someone would find them, and when they did, she would be forced to choose. She stared at Kale, sleeping beside her. He was so different from anything she had ever known. Yet, in this moment, he was the one constant in her life. Rhea knew what she had to do. If no one else would understand Kale, she would. She had made her choice. She would fight to protect him, no matter the cost. The quiet woods outside the cave seemed to hold her breath with her. The silence was profound, as if the world itself was waiting for her decision. And as Rhea looked out at the stars through the opening in the cave, she knew this was just a beginning. The dense forest stretched out before Rhea, the air thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. She sat cross-legged on the ground, the faint rustling of leaves above the only sound as Kale, the injured alien, watched her cautiously from a few feet away. His eyes, dark and unreadable, flickered with wariness, but there was a hint of curiosity as well. Rhea's fingers brushed over the sketch pad she had been using to communicate with him. She drew a simple circle and pointed to it, then to herself. "Rhea," she said softly, but Kale's eyes remained unreadable. Rhea sighed and drew a second figure next to the circle, a stick figure with arms outstretched. She pointed to the figure. "You." Kale blinked, his elongated reptilian features still as stone. He didn't understand, not yet, but Rhea could see the gears turning in his mind. "Rhea," she repeated,
emphasizing the sound of her name, before mimicking the drawing of his body with gestures. She repeated a basic word in his language, one that she'd learned from his earlier grunts. "Kale," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the breeze. The alien's eyes flickered, a silent understanding passing between them. In those moments, the growing connection between them was more than a language barrier. It was a quiet bond, one that transcended words. She couldn't help but marvel at the way he was beginning to show trust in her through his actions, despite his constant suspicion. Their communication was slow, like a fragile thread being woven, but Rhea felt something in her chest stir, a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could bridge this vast divide. The memory came flooding back as Rhea watched Kale retreat into the shadows of their hidden sanctuary, his long limbs gracefully disappearing from sight. Her heart pounded, but it wasn't fear. It was something deeper. She had always been different, her mind twisted in ways that the world didn't understand. As a child, she had been dismissed as odd, out of sync with everyone else. When her classmates played together, she had found solace in books, in quiet corners, in the peaceful hum of solitude. Her autism had made the world feel like a loud, incomprehensible puzzle. Her mother, well-meaning but overwhelmed, often told Rhea to just try harder to fit in. But how could she? The world wasn't built for someone like her, someone whose thoughts often felt like a whirlwind, untouchable and hard to follow. She had become a master at hiding, at pretending to be like everyone else. And yet in all that hiding, she never felt truly seen, until Kale. Now, as she tended to his wounds, her fingers brushing against the tough scales on his arm, she understood. He too was isolated. He too longed for connection, but didn't know how to reach it. She had never thought of herself as someone capable of empathy, but Kale had become a mirror, a reflection of her own struggles. A silent understanding passed between them. In Kale, she saw her own brokenness, and for the first time, Rhea didn't feel so alone.
Days turned into weeks. Every moment with Kyle felt like a lesson in silence, and Rhea learned the power of stillness. At first, communication was a battle. Gestures, drawings, sounds, anything to make him understand. But slowly, Kyle responded. Not with words, but with subtle shifts in his posture. His tail would flicker when he was curious, his head tilting slightly when he was confused, a small, barely perceptible movement when he felt fear. Rhea began to realize that they spoke not through language, but through shared understanding, through shared silence. One night, as she sat beside the fire, she could feel the tension in the air. Kyle was sitting a few feet away, his body still and alert, eyes scanning the darkness. Rhea drew a simple picture of two figures sitting together, both looking out toward the horizon. He watched her intently, then touched the drawing, indicating the horizon. "Home," Rhea whispered, her voice barely audible in the wind. Kyle responded with a sharp, guttural sound that didn't sound like words, but there was something in his tone, something laced with longing. He was remembering his home. Rhea reached out, her hand hovering just above his. She didn't need words to understand his pain. The bond between them had transcended that. They were connected, not in the way she had ever imagined, but in a way that was pure and true. The moment came in the dead of night, a rustling in the bushes, the unmistakable sound of something large moving toward them. Rhea's breath caught in her throat. She didn't need to see it to know that it was dangerous. Before she could react, Kyle was moving, his body a blur of motion. He was faster than she could track, and by the time she stood up, he was standing between her and the creature, a massive, snarling predator. The creature lunged, its claws swiping through the air, but Kyle was ready. With a roar, he met it head-on, his claws slashing through the creature's hide. Rhea watched in awe as Kyle fought, his movements precise and lethal. When it was over, Kyle stood over the dead creature, panting heavily, his chest heaving. Rhea rushed to his side, her eyes wide with fear and admiration. "You saved me," she whispered, placing her hand on his wound. Kyle met her gaze, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of understanding, a bond forged in the heat of the battle. As she stitched his wounds, Rhea felt a surge of warmth. This alien, this creature she had once feared, was now her protector. They were no longer two strangers trying to understand each other. They were allies,
bound by the silence between them. Rhea's heart pounded as she sat at the edge of her window, staring out at the town below. The fear in the air was palpable. Rumors spread faster than wildfire. Missing livestock, strange sounds in the night. And Cal's presence, hidden deep in the woods, was the only thing that seemed to link everything together. As the town's suspicion grew, Rhea knew the walls were closing in. She could feel the eyes on her, the whispers behind her back. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand. And every day it became harder to hide the truth. The tension between Rhea and the townspeople deepened, and she knew it was only a matter of time before their secret was exposed. She couldn't help but wonder how long they could keep hiding before everything came crashing down.
The sound of military vehicles echoed in the distance, growing louder by the minute. Rhea's heart raced, and she felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The town was on lockdown. She could hear the heavy steps of soldiers outside her door, the tightness in their voices as they questioned her. Rhea's mind raced. She could feel the walls closing in. "They're looking for him," she whispered to herself. Kael's presence loomed in her thoughts. If they found him... Rhea's grip tightened around the door handle, her resolve hardening. She had protected him this far. She couldn't stop now. The truth hung heavily in the air. Kael was no ordinary alien. He had seen something that the military wanted to hide at all costs. He had witnessed something that could destroy everything. Kael's silence was no longer a simple communication barrier. It was the weight of secrets, the burden of knowledge that could bring down the world. Rhea's heart twisted as she realized what he carried. She wasn't just protecting him. She was protecting the truth. The military was closing in. Rhea could hear their voices, growing louder as they neared. Kael was ready to flee, but she could see the fear in his eyes. He knew what would happen if they were caught. Rhea's mind raced. She could let him go, let him escape into the unknown, but at what cost? Would she ever see him again? Would he survive? "No," she whispered, stepping forward. "Stay with me." Kael's gaze softened, a quiet understanding passing between them. And as the military drew closer, Rhea made a decision, one that would change everything. They were in this together, no matter the cost. The tunnels groaned with age, every footstep echoing like a secret waiting to be discovered. Rhea held the flickering torch high, its dim light bouncing off rusted support beams and cracked concrete. She glanced behind her. Kael limped, his alien form barely cloaked in the oversized hoodie she had given him. The disguise wouldn't hold under scrutiny, but it was all they had. This place used to carry iron to fuel the cities. Now it hides ghosts. Kael didn't speak in words. His voice was broken, stuttering, more vibration than sound. But his thoughts bled to her mind. Fear, pain, gratitude. Rhea hadn't asked for this. She was just a kid from the outskirts, raised to believe aliens were threats. Yet here she was, protecting one like her life depended on it. They found a chamber deeper in, half collapsed but dry. Rhea rolled out a thermal blanket and handed Kael a ration bar. He looked at it with confusion before mimicking her motions. "Eat," she said softly. Kael nodded, trying to chew. A flicker of a memory hit her. Her little brother, gone years ago, eating with the same innocent confusion after getting sick. Something about Kael reminded her of him. She sat beside him, heart pounding. Outside, drones buzzed overhead. The military was closing in, not just for Kael, but for anyone helping aliens. Harboring him could mean exile, or worse. "I don't even know what you are, but I know you're not the monster they say you are."
Kael's head turned. His hand, long and slender, reached toward hers. A soft pulse of energy bridged the space between them. Then came the images, flashes of fire, alien screams, soldiers with Earth insignias opening fire on beings that posed no threat. Rhea pulled back, trembling. What had she just seen? Was that us? Kael's face twisted with sorrow. The images haunted her vision even after the link faded. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. They weren't hiding from monsters. They were hiding from the truth. The next morning, or what passed for morning underground, Rhea woke to Kale staring at the tunnel ceiling, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. He turned toward her as she stirred, and the images came again, uninvited but urgent. She saw it clearly now. Kale's world, vibrant and filled with crystalline structures, peaceful beings gathered in celebration, and then fire. Earth ships ripping through the sky, beams of light shattering towers, peaceful envoys cut down without warning. It hadn't been a misunderstanding. It was deliberate, calculated. Rhea recoiled, her chest tightened. No, that's not what they told us. They said your kind attacked first. Kale sat up, hands glowing with muted light. He pushed one toward her forehead gently. She let him. The telepathic surge was overwhelming. This time, she felt Kale's panic as he watched his kin fall, his escape pod spiraling toward Earth, his confusion when he crashed near an Earth outpost, and the horror when soldiers opened fire. Rhea clutched her head. Why would they do this? Kale's thoughts whispered, fear, power, lies. Tears welled in her eyes. Everything she knew, every lesson, every propaganda broadcast, every warning about alien aggression collapsed in her mind like a dying star. They're hunting you because you saw it, because you survived. Kale nodded, eyes shimmering. And suddenly, survival wasn't enough. The truth had to be told.
Rhea stood in her parents' living room, dust on her clothes, the sting of the truth still burning her mind. Kale remained outside, hidden. Her father looked up from his datapad. "Where have you been?" Her mother added, "You didn't come home last night. We were worried sick." Rhea took a deep breath. "I was in the tunnels, with someone." Her father frowned. "You're not making sense." She stepped forward. "I'm hiding an alien. His name is Kale, and he's not a threat. We are." Silence. Shock etched on both faces. Her mother whispered, "What did you just say?" I saw it, in his mind. The attack. Our attack on peaceful aliens. Kale's people were trying to make contact, and we destroyed them. Her father's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, then something heavier. That's classified military history. How would he even... I raised my voice. Because he lived it. Her mother stepped back, shaken. "This can't be true. We'd know. The council would tell us." Would they? Rhea asked, voice trembling. Or would they lie to keep us obedient? The silence lingered, and then her father spoke. "What do you plan to do?" "I need your help. We have to get him to the city. They recognize alien rights there. Maybe he'll be safe." Her parents exchanged glances. For once, they listened. The hover truck roared to life. Rhea sat in the back, gripping Kale's hand. Her parents sat in front, tense but committed. The road ahead twisted through ruined towns and surveillance zones. Kale's hood was up. His eyes glowed faintly, but Rhea had smeared ash over his face to mask the shimmer. Her heart thudded as they neared the outer checkpoints. "We'll take the old merchant's route," her father said. "It's slower, but less guarded." Rhea nodded. "Thank you." Her mother kept glancing back at Kale, with fear in her eyes, but also curiosity. "Does he feel fear, like us?" she asked softly. Rhea looked at Kale, who stared out the window, silent. "He feels more than we do, and he forgives faster." The truck jolted. They passed through a stretch of abandoned structures, memories of when Earth mined its own soil before reaching into the stars. Kale's thoughts brushed Rhea's mind. Danger ahead. Rhea leaned forward. Checkpoint. He senses it. Her father cursed under his breath. "I'll divert through the canyon." "No time," her mother said. "They'll block all exits once we're flagged." They had minutes, maybe seconds. Rhea knew what she had to do. "I'll cause a distraction, buy you time." "No," her mother snapped. "It's too dangerous." "It's the only way." Kale turned to her, his thoughts firm.
I won't leave you. You have to, Rhea whispered. We don't survive this unless someone does. And she opened the door.
Rhea ran. Mud splattered her boots as she veered off toward the checkpoint's edge. The guards barked commands. Lights flared. She raised her hands. "I'm alone," she screamed. "Please, don't shoot." Guns trained on her. From the corner of her eye, she saw the truck slip into the shadows. A soldier approached. "ID." "I dropped it," she lied, trembling. "Please, I was running from something. In the woods. I thought I saw an alien." They paused. "Which direction?" She pointed away from the truck. A second later, lights flooded the opposite tree line. Soldiers dashed into the brush. She smiled through the fear. "Go, Kyle. Go now." Then came the stun blast. Everything went black. Pain, blinding pain. Rhea's eyes fluttered open. A military cell, cold walls, buzzing lights. Chains held her wrists. Her lips were cracked. She had no idea how long it had been. Then the lights flickered. A hiss. A vent opened. Kyle. He emerged like a shadow, silent, purposeful. The guards outside were unconscious, his glow pulsing with calm intensity. Rhea tried to speak. He touched her forehead. "I'm here. You saved me. Now I save you." With a wave of his hand, the cuffs released. She collapsed into his arms. "How did you find me?" "Our bond. I felt your pain." They fled into the night, together. City lights shimmered in the distance. Kyle projected the crash footage on a public square's massive screen. Crowds gathered. Footage played. Peaceful aliens waving. Earth soldiers firing. Screams. Kyle's crash. Gasps. Outrage. Rhea stepped forward, voice hoarse. "They lied to us. This isn't war. It's murder." The crowd erupted. Drones arrived. Authorities demanded silence. But it was too late. Truth had taken root. News feeds exploded. Alien massacre exposed. Cover-up unraveling. The council declared the footage fake, but independent analysts confirmed its authenticity. Rhea and Kyle stayed hidden, their message spreading like wildfire. Riots, protests, demands for justice. Even soldiers began questioning orders. A new future stirred. The truth, once buried, had become a weapon, and humanity could never unsee it again. The war for truth had begun, and this time, the shadows would not win. The air was different now. What began as whispers had turned into chants. Rhea and Kyle stood under the cracked arch of the old transit dome, the backdrop of their first escape now flooded with lights and camera drones. Where once they hid in the shadows, now they stood in the open, no longer fugitives, but figures of change. Rhea could feel the heat of attention, not just from humans, but aliens who had once feared Kyle's kind. Her hand brushed his, subtle, careful. The gesture was caught by a drone, broadcast instantly. The crowd murmured, some in awe, others in confusion. Kyle looked uneasy. "You're certain about this?" Rhea nodded. "We've already done the impossible. We survived each other." Their bond had grown, slowly, painfully, through shared fear, betrayal, and the chaos of two species colliding. But what made them symbols wasn't just survival. It was understanding. Kindness offered across a line written in blood. The media called them the bridge. Protesters painted murals. Children imitated Kyle's salute. A generation was watching. And yet Rhea felt the pressure of a world waiting for her to speak, to stumble, to prove or disprove humanity's capacity for connection.
With every step forward, she felt the burden of history press heavier. And still, she walked.
The broadcast had consequences. The moment Kale's footage aired of a covert human unit erasing alien survivors, it detonated like a truth bomb. What was meant to stay buried had clawed its way back into daylight. Now, questions screamed from every screen. Who authorized the strike? Why was it hidden? A tribunal was formed. Faces once comfortable in power squirmed under the lights. Rhea watched the hearings from a small corner cafe, Kale beside her, his eyes calculating every move. "They're going to try and blame one squad," Kale said coldly. "Isolate it, contain it." Rhea nodded. "But people are watching now. They won't be able to smother this." But the government tried. Memos vanished, witnesses recanted, a general disappeared. Outside, protests thickened. Humans and aliens marching side by side. Kale became the unofficial voice of alien outrage. His words cut through silence like a blade. Peace without truth is not peace, it's obedience. Rhea stared at the chaos and felt something stir. Not fear, resolve. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was war, of truth against control, and they had just fired the first shot. The letter arrived by secure drone, a seal with 4 languages, a symbol of unity or a test of it. Rhea sat frozen at her kitchen table, the words blurred. "You are formally invited to speak at the Interspecies Accord Summit." Her hands trembled. Kale placed his hand over hers. "This is what we fought for. I'm not a politician, I'm just me." "Exactly," Kale said. "That's why it matters." She hadn't slept for 2 nights. The speech loomed like a mountain made of glass. Beautiful, terrifying, fragile. She practiced in front of a mirror, stumbled over words, erased pages of drafts. What could she possibly say that would matter to a galaxy watching? And then she stopped writing. She spoke from memory, from scars, from hope. "I saw fear in Kale's eyes the first time we met, and he saw it in mine. But we didn't run, we reached. That's what being human means." Kale stood in the doorway, silently listening. "You'll move them," he said softly. Rhea looked at her reflection, not the girl who ran, the woman who stayed. She was ready. The grocery store felt different. Rhea walked in expecting the same cold stares, the same hushed whispers. But Mrs. Linden, the old woman who once yelled at her for harboring a beast, offered a quiet nod instead. A boy who once mocked Kale's gait now wore a plastic replica of his shoulder armor. Small things, but they mattered. Rhea's town had always been wary, clutching old fears like blankets. But now, curiosity poked through. Questions replaced judgment. The change was slow, uncertain, but real. Still, not everyone approved. A man muttered as she passed, "Traitor lover." Rhea didn't flinch. She didn't have to. Because behind her, someone else muttered, "She's braver than you." And that mattered more. Later that night, Kale sat on the porch, scanning the stars. Rhea joined them, silence stretching between them. "Your people, they're changing," he said. "So am I," Rhea replied. And both knew neither change would come easy.
The knock on the door was hesitant. Rhea opened it to find her parents, shoulders slouched, eyes wet. Her mother held an old photograph. Her father had a worn letter. "We didn't know how to say this," her mother began. "But we were wrong." Her father nodded. "We let fear decide for us." Tears welled in Rhea's eyes. For so long, she had carried their silence like a wound. Now words finally stitched it closed. "I needed you back then," she said, voice breaking. "We're here now," her mother whispered, "if you'll let us be." She collapsed into their arms. Later, Kale entered the room, cautious. Rhea's father extended a hand. Kale hesitated, then shook it. No speeches, no apologies, just a silent bridge rebuilt. And sometimes, that's enough.
The ship waited silently, its core pulsing like a distant heart. Kale stood before it, bag in hand. The council had arranged safe return. No more trials, no more exile. Rhea stood beside him, silent. The moment loomed heavy. "I thought you wanted to go home," she said quietly. "I did," Kale replied. "I still do." "Then why are you still here?" He looked at her, truly looked. Because home isn't always where you're from. Sometimes it's who you protect. Rhea blinked back tears. "I'll be okay. You're brave, but not invincible." Kale turned back to the ship, then dropped his bag. "I'll leave later, not now." The pilot said nothing, just nodded. Kale's choice wasn't dramatic. No music swelled, no grand gestures. But to Rhea, it was everything. The time finally came. Kale stood at the platform, departure imminent. Rhea approached, heart hammering. No one else stood there, just them, and everything they weren't saying. Kale extended his hand, not for a shake, but with 2 fingers pointed upward, a gesture from his people. Rhea mirrored it, touching her fingers to his. No words, just a promise that no matter the distance, no matter the world, they understood each other. And that was enough. As the ship lifted, Rhea stood still, fingers to the sky. The crowd around her wouldn't understand, but she didn't need them to. Because the future wasn't about understanding everyone. It was about being understood by someone. The wind blew softly at the edge of the quiet borderlands, where Earth met alien territory, a place once divided by fear, now marked by a monument of hope. There stood the statue, Rhea's hand extended forward, palm open, finger slightly bent. Kale's alien form faced her, hand gently placed in hers, both captured in a frozen moment of trust. 2 figures, one human, one not, forever carved from black stone and silver alloy. Around the base, a single inscription read, "Understanding begins with a gesture." Visitors from both sides came here now, some to stare, some to reflect, some to mourn what was lost, and some to imagine what could still be built. The statue wasn't perfect, just like the alliance it represented, but it stood tall, as a reminder, as a challenge, as a promise that the bond formed between Rhea and Kale had not been for nothing.
Though the statue marked peace, the path forward was uneasy. There were still whispers in back rooms, still protests in the streets, still fear in the eyes of those who didn't understand. Some humans called the Alliance naive. Some aliens still viewed Earth as volatile. But meetings were happening. Trade had begun. Young minds from both sides now studied each other's languages. Progress was slow, but it was real and fragile, like glass carried across a storm. But Rhea had learned something Kale had once told her. Even fragile things can hold great weight, if you believe in them. The forest was quieter than she remembered. No footsteps chasing her, no voices calling her strange. Just wind in the trees and her own steady breathing. Rhea walked slowly, her coat brushing against branches, her boots crunching dried leaves. She wasn't hiding now, she wasn't lost. She came here by choice. This forest used to be a prison, a place where she ran to escape. Now it was a place of peace, a sanctuary. Each step was a reminder of how far she had come, not just through the war, but through herself. She was no longer just a girl who heard the stars differently. She was someone who had stood before them and been heard back. At a clearing, Rhea stopped. The sky above her was fading to twilight, dusky pink melting into pale gold. She reached into her coat pocket. Her fingers closed around something familiar and warm from her touch. A stone, small, smooth,
etched with a symbol that only two beings in the galaxy truly understood. She stared at it for a moment, not smiling, not crying, just remembering. Kale had given it to her during their last night together. No grand goodbye, no long speeches, just a stone. Just a look. Just meaning. Too deep for words. The sign carved into it wasn't just their bond, it was a message. Even apart, we are still connected. She squeezed it gently and closed her eyes. It was enough. As Rhea walks away from the clearing, her silhouette fading into the trees, her voice speaks softly. She didn't need the world to understand her. She only needed one, and that was enough to change everything.